All right. Well, welcome everyone to our conversation today. I'm really excited to be bringing this conversation to the general public. I have some pretty incredible people that we're going to have a conversation around all things human brilliance within the context of high-performing teams. Before I go much further, I do want to just quickly acknowledge the amazing humans that are going to share their point of view with us today. I want to start, Shaun Cameron, you're first in my purview here. Shaun is a senior leader within the Custom Fleet organisation, and Shaun has significant experience in all things people. Shaun, you'll correct me if I'm wrong, but you're very passionate, as am I, in the domain of people and capability. We also have Elisa Nerone. Elisa, too, is a seasoned executive in the space of capability and performance. And Elisa is currently at the REA Group, but I was very lucky to work with Elisa at Latitude Financial Services, and Elisa also has senior experience at BHP as well. And finally, Catherine Heffernan, another colleague in arms of the panel. Kat and I have known each other the longest, and Kat is a multinational executive that's worked across people, product, operations, and I'm sure there's others, Kat, but
yeah, I decided to do a lot of functions at one stage. So,
right.
yep.
You started at the age of 10. But,
Yeah.
but Kat and I are the grandmothers of the panel today and share several chapters together across organisations. But I'm really, really proud to be able to bring this incredible expertise to the conversation today, which is very people-focused. And as everyone knows, Maxme is in the business of people upskilling globally now, and I have a strong passion about all things people and people capability, and it's what drove me to start Maxme, and we're now into our 7th year. But without further ado, I do want to kick off the conversation because I want to allow plenty of time for questions as well. So today we're bringing human brilliance within the context of teams to life because globally, research will tell us that the highest performing organisations are made up of high-performing teams. And this is teams that perform to a high standard over a sustainable period of time. And one of my favourite research houses, which is Gallup, we use Gallup a lot in our research and our programs. Gallup found that high-performing teams, or those teams that perform over a sustainable period of time, have a few core features to what makes them high-performing. The first and foremost one is innovation that is supported by synergy. And what do I mean by that? And that is that people who come together and understand that collectively they're more powerful than they are as individuals. And Stephen Covey calls it synergy. 1 + 1 = 3. That's the first concept. The second concept is very much around this sort of, kind of the customer experience being delivered via a collective team effort. So if you think about organizations, the customer experience doesn't live in any one part of the organization. It lives across silos. And when those silos are not silos, but in fact a collective one team made up of high-performing teams that come together and deliver a sort of end-to-end customer experience, that's what really drives high performance and results for those organizations. Resilience from the context of people coming together and supporting each other through, I might get everyone to put us on mute if possible, if you're not speaking or asking a question. So resilience from the point of view of we collectively are there for each other, and not everybody, we use the analogy of how geese fly in a lot of our programs. And if you think about geese, they fly in a V formation because that is the optimized way that they fly together. And in fact, the behavior of geese is that they are there for each other. No one goose is always at the front. They peel back to the back and someone else takes over when the person at the front gets tired, when people are not themselves or not feeling great, when I should say when the geese are, two geese peel off from the V formation and look after that goose until that goose can resume its flight path with the others. So there's this concept of resilience through the group having each other's backs. And then finally, this concept of efficiency, that actually when we draw on each other's collective strengths and know each other's collective derailers, we can actually work far more efficiently together. And so, Gallup, I think, has got it right in terms of some of those traits that exist in high-performing teams, and the collective of those high-performing teams being the collective results of the organisation. But today is a conversation around what's happening around the traps and the collective experience around whether Gallup is right and what we're seeing in the current environment. But a lot of these human traits that come together, things like curiosity, critical thinking, empathy, resilience, collaboration. They're the key things that are coming out of a lot of the research, not just Gallup, World Economic Forum, McKinsey, Deloitte Access Economics. They're all saying the same thing, that the skills that are going to be required in this fairly complex world that we live in are those human skills. And the collective of those human skills come together to then deliver on high performance and so on. But anyway, enough from me. I really just wanted to set the context around some of that research and to really ground our conversation today to see whether we think the reality matches what all the research houses are saying. So without further ado, I might hand over to our panel so that I stop talking and you start hearing from them. And I might open with a more generic question or general question to all of you, please, to see how you are seeing things unfold in the workplaces that you inhabit, and also you've got networks yourselves, and I'm sure have conversations about this. But how are you seeing this play out amongst individuals within your organisations and the teams that they are in? Particularly as we're seeing this madness of this rapidly evolving AI conversation, this, I guess, what you'd call phenomena at the moment, the AI obsession, as I like to call it. How are you seeing things play out on the ground? We'll start wherever.
I'm happy to kick in. I think on behalf of the Custom
Sure.
Fleet business, our people team is actually leading the charge with AI. So we've coordinated an internal AI agency. So the things that we're seeing is a bit of I'd call it a split screen reality. So you've got that group of people who are so excited, they're seeing some efficiency gains, or they're self-educating along a path and then butting into capability gaps because they don't know how to progress much further with AI, and the expertise in the market to bring AI talent into your business is really, really tight. I think then you've got the anxiety on the other side, will I be left behind? Is this safe? Am I allowed to use it? And will my job be safe? So that is all very, very fascinating in the context of trying to develop people in this time. I think individuals, it's probably changing for me the definition of good performance. So I think it's no longer about just, can you produce something that's quality? Can you produce something that's good, has sound judgment, it's quick and has the right checks and balances? So I think the bar is just being lifted for so many different people.
I really love that, Shaun. And yesterday I had a conversation with I guess what you would call a researcher and an educator in the space of AI. And they were talking about this other thing called defensibility. So interesting, as you were pointing out, as I'm putting out my own footprint into the world and I'm using AI to do that, is what I'm coming up with defensible? Is it something that's adding value? And the thinking behind it, is that defensible? And I thought that was a really interesting angle that they gave me. I hadn't thought of before that. Kat or Elisa, your thoughts?
Yeah. I think I'm seeing both a response of both caution and in some cases extreme caution, and a sense of play, so that you were sort of alluding to, Shaun. And that kind of relates to our own individual preferences too. I mean, some leaders are waiting till there's absolute proof that something can be done before leaning into it. And when we think about the rapid cycle of AI and how quickly it's evolving, I wonder how that's going to serve some leaders to be sitting back with some caution as opposed to leaning in and having a real sense of involvement and play on things. So that's something we really need to kind of be. And then they've got other people, like Shaun said, who are just racing off. Oh my God, this is amazing. What can I do with it? And in both cases, I wonder if we're hitting the right note on balancing things.
Yeah, I
Right.
think I'm trying to think about what else I can add that's a little bit different, but I'm seeing very similar things in terms of what you talked about, Shaun. There's a lot of excitement and then a lot of anxiety. Um, and that's totally understandable considering that, you wake up every morning and there's a new release of a language model or something's changed and so I think that fear of sort of being left behind or not knowing the latest update or what's going on, I think sort of adds into that. I think there is definitely a barrier to entry and to your point, Kat, where some individuals are either sort of waiting a little bit or cautiously or just don't even know where to start. And so, sort of what I'm seeing across a lot of organizations and lots of different people are talking about this is just these sort of different levels of capability and understanding from like early experimentation to really sophisticated AI power users or adopters. And sort of there could be 8 levels, 4 levels, 3 levels, but there's levels across, and then trying to support the capability build, Ren, in terms of both the human skills but the technical capability. It's actually really difficult through a period where you have quite a segmented users at different levels and they need it for different things. And I'm just thinking about even an example, we've been talking about even just in my own team about how, we can improve some processes and sort of when you think about the work, sometimes I was like, I don't really want an AI agent to do that. I like seeing what the weekly report is because I actually go and read it and see what the team's doing. I don't need that summarized by an agent because then I miss that step. So I think that's where sort of like the judgment, the complex problem solving, like I fear that there could be maybe an overuse in some areas that actually you don't need it. Yeah, that's sort of
Yeah,
what I'm
I really
seeing.
love that, and I'd like to take this further, if we could. So there's been quite a bit of conversation around how individuals are adopting or sort of putting it or not putting it into play. And interestingly, I had a conversation with a colleague in India who was talking about this multi-generational differences playing out. So you've got your Gen Zs, early entry to career, who have got nothing to lose, and they're adopting like crazy. They're like going, this is amazing. I'm loving this efficiency, efficiency. And then you've got boomers who are still in the workplace who have been doing this the same way for 30 years, 40 years, who are going, I'm not changing. Thanks. I'm quite happy with how I do things. I don't want to change and I don't want to adopt. So back to the team cohesion thing. The 1+1 = 3, and the customer experience coming to life through processes that live across teams. What I'm really seeing a lot of is inward thinking, right? A lot of individuals grappling with, what has this got to do with my job? What has this got to do with my career safety? All that sort of stuff. But then when we lift it to the team cohesion and how teams are adopting and changing and doing things together, I'm really keen on your thoughts on, is it working, or is there still some team cohesion challenges? I'm really interested in your reflections on this.
Off if you want, we can go backwards this time.
Thanks. Thank you.
I think a couple of things. I think um, the culture within organizations or the culture in universities or wherever it may be where teams are working together, I think is really important because if there is a supportive culture with high adoption, then those intergenerational um, generalizations, Ren,
Yeah.
break down a little bit because actually the team, the culture sort of supports the different levels of understanding or levels of change and adoption. But I do think there's a realization that team and roles within teams are changing and teams need to work through that together. And I think your earlier point around people doing it individually, that's where I think a little bit of lack of cohesion, we're starting to see that. But I guess my challenge is that okay through a period of really big change? I don't think it's going to feel a bit messy. I think at some points it's just that, so we don't get to the far end of being over messy, or too messy.
Yeah.
As we're adopting that.
I think your point is right, though. It fundamentally comes down to, and back to Gallup research, they found that one of the fundamental principles of any high-performing team is belonging, psychological safety, and the willingness to kind of be heard and speak up and challenge, right? That sort of growth mindset. And that is very much, it either exists or it doesn't exist. And we have all read the Aristotle research where Google found that their highest performing teams reported twice more than the lower performing teams this concept of psychological safety. And so I feel, Elisa, what you're saying is right. Is it okay to be messy? Yes. Does the customer experience fall apart in that messiness? Yes. So if a company doesn't quickly respond to this lack of culture, lack of cohesion, lack of that team dynamic or high-performing dynamic quickly, it all can unravel very quickly, I feel. And that's what we're starting to see in workplaces. A lot of this reporting of our teams are finding it difficult to work together and to keep delivering and not feel exhausted. And, so I think what you're saying is 100% right. Fundamentally, what it comes down to is not technical skills. It's actually team culture and team cohesion. If you don't have that in place, you quickly need to move towards that. If you do have that in place, that's going to help hold this messiness that's happening all over the place at the moment. I will shut up though. Kat or Shaun, your thoughts?
Just a thought that occurred as you were speaking there, Ren, is that, like, let's not forget that a lot of people and a lot of teams are having a threat response triggered. So it's unknown. We've got this ancient operating system between our ears, dealing with technology that's rapidly evolving, right? So it's no doubt, and some humans really triggering a threat response. So what can we do as leaders to kind of neutralize that threat response, so that you can get to a place where you can actually work with it, is one of the things that we have to play with too.
I love that. And I always, I always argue, because I think what you said is right, is what is the role of the leader, but also what is the role of the team dynamic? Yeah. How do we support each other? Back to the Gallup findings of that synergy between team members, or the resilience of the team, which is, how do we notice in one another that people are having that threat response, or we don't fear change, we fear loss? So what is playing out for people, and how are we recognizing that and there for one another, which again requires that psychological safety and that sense of belonging, that power of the team, the power of the V formation of the geese. So I think you're right in that, how are we the lizard brain, and how are we aware that what's playing out for each of us at any given point in time that requires that connection and that awareness? Yeah,
that's right.
Shaun?
I think a different lens is also the notion of performance heroics probably doesn't exist in the new world. Like, it's not about the individual anymore. It's about what the team collective output needs to be. So I think that's really fascinating. Leaders and individuals to grapple with. Performance ebbs and flows, but it's unrealistic to think that humans will always be at the top of the game all the time.
Yeah, and I'm just letting you know, you're having a slight difficulty with your speaker, Shaun.
Apologies,
but,
there is some
no,
works
not
there.
at all, not at all, not at all. But I think you're right, is that ongoing reformation, and what used to be rewarded in the old world can no longer continue to be rewarded, because, and I find this the most fascinating, and I actually love part of this, although it's the scary bit, which is the easy stuff is what gets automated, right? The repeatable, easy, predictable stuff. What is left for humans to do is the complex stuff in the unknown. Cause and effect is not understood. You have to probe, you've got to hypothesize, you've got to iterate, all of those things, right? And that's the scary stuff, because that's more unknown than the predictable stuff, obviously. But in order to solve those problems and innovate, you need to work with others. It's going to be very difficult for us to solve problems or complex problems on our own, which was possible in the old world. So that paradigm is shifting in organizations, but is the performance measures of those organizations shifting? I used to rage against the machine, and Kat knows this. I used to balk at individual scorecards. I used to always want to go with group scorecards, because how do you reward collectivism and being there for one another? The only way you can do that is to move away from individual performance and move to group performance, or at least a balance. And most organizations don't have that in place. And I used to fight hard with the P&C peeps and lose every time. But, at the end of the day, where are we headed to? What are we rewarding? What are we measuring? Because we know what gets measured gets done, right? We know this. So anyway, moving on.
I just had a couple of quick,
Please.
I think there's an opportunity too. So I think you're talking about sort of like the easy work becoming easier, or being automated, or agents sort of doing that. I think it is the more complex work, but it's also the more exciting work and the more creative work. So I think the more that we can talk about that, there might be more challenging work, more complex work, but actually there is the higher value work that actually is where humans add value, and most people want to be spending their time. And so while it might feel a bit scary, it's also really exciting if we can construct it in that way. And it's okay not to know, and you touched on psych safety, to say, from a leadership perspective, we're clear on these things, but actually we're still really not sure about these things and we're experimenting. But I think, making sure that there's stories within organizations or outside of organizations about both the positive and maybe the challenges with it is important, to give people confidence and some it might not solve exactly everything around and let everyone know, but for a team it might just give them a bit of confidence and connection to know that there's some really positive things happening as well.
I think that's right, Elisa. I think
Liz.
where AI can replace analytics, the antidote is to become even more human and to lean in with the more human stuff, right?
But guys, I just want to give you a contrasting view. So as you guys know, I'm a business transformation, person from way back. And I also thought that if you emancipate people from the drudgery, they're going to be so excited about all of this value add work. But here's what I found with this very large program I ran at one of the big banks. And that was that we went to automate a lot of the administrative work, this particular, and I won't sort of go into too much detail because everyone will know what I'm talking about. And we went to automate the drudgery of what these very highly paid, highly capable people were doing. And we moved them to the more complex, value-add, customer-facing work. And guess what they didn't love doing? The high-value, customer-facing work, because their whole career, what they were paid for, what their results were showing, was the results of the administrative work, right? The predictable work, the work that they had gained this reputation about doing very well. And the minute we took that away from them, unfortunately, looking back, the original work was not, the change management wasn't done very well. And so what we didn't do was really involve them in this process of, what does it look like to reinvent myself? What does it look like to move to this other way of working? How am I going to still be able to be an awesome expert with all of the right kind of, reputational stuff playing out in this new world? And how is that not going to be, sort of counted against me through that messiness of shifting? We didn't do that very well. And so what ended up happening was all these amazing things that we ended up giving them, these spoils, these tools, these ways of working, were rejected because they didn't want to leave the old world, because that world was known to them and that was where their reputation sat. So the only thing I'll say is my lived experience around this is that humans often reject change because they fear the loss that comes with that change, even though the work is more exciting, even though it's more value add, even though it's more impactful, even though it's, more actualized. This is the human, in my experience only, but I'm keen for your thoughts. This is the human condition.
I've experienced that same thing, Ren, and it's nothing to do with AI. That is a classic example of thinking the technical solution is going to do the heavy lifting, and people are going to sail off into the sunset thinking it's wonderful, right? So to your point, you really have to work with people on what is their identity, what is it. It's not just a here you go, here's your new task. It can be deep work on identity to get people across the line on things like that.
I love leaning into that. We've done a lot of work with our leaders over the past couple of years, especially just getting them to be a bit more open about their own mind traps. What was fascinating within the cohort of people that we had go through the program was ego was almost the number one for everyone, even though we don't like to admit it. And I love what Kat said earlier, and I think about this quite a lot in terms of change. That scarf model by Dr. David Rock, if you can just unpack, are people feeling threatened because their status is being threatened? What certainty are we giving them through this period? Are they afraid of losing autonomy? I'm going to have a new manager on my back. Relatedness is always really interesting. I'm breaking apart a system of relationships that I used to belong to, and I have to reset that. That's really scary for people. And your sense of fairness can get a bit stuck when you see things happen to you or others, and you just think it's not right without the broader context of the actual change and where the organization needs to position for the future.
Awesome. So really good segue. Liz, did you have anything? Sorry, did I cut you off?
Keep going.
Okay, beautiful. So this concept of team of champions versus champion team, which is, one of my biggest catch cries at the moment is, and we've talked about this now, so I'm really keen for us to just, double tap on it, is it possible to have a champion team without first developing the individual champions within that team? And I'm just really keen to hear your experiences of it, your thoughts on this. Is, we talk a lot, and I'm very passionate about this, you guys know this, is we spend the majority of the money of the organization on a small percentage of people that happen to be the leaders or people on talent programs, and then set them loose on the 90% of the rest of the organization, hoping to create a culture and an upskilling, which, doesn't happen. So my very strong passion, as you guys know, is we have to build bottom up. We've got to build individuals into their highest potential to then be able to actualize within the team model. But I'm really keen to hear your thoughts or any contrary views or experiences that you've got around, can we build that champion team without having the team of champions first?
To go, I think yes, and actually more so. So I've got a couple of ideas running through my head here, and I think the best way to scale that, in my personal opinion and sort of my philosophy, is to have really great leaders or mission leaders of teams that can bring the best out of those people. And we can talk to all the components of what that looks like. That's creating psychological safety, that's being clear on accountabilities, clear on the mission, etc. And then that leader's job is to get the best out of that human or that team member. And that comes in lots of different shapes and ways and sizes because everyone's motivated differently. And I think about the sporting analogy a lot, and I think it's probably used a lot in terms of, you could have, and soccer's my favorite sport. My son is obsessed with soccer. So you could have, your Lionel Messi in one team, or, you could have, your star soccer players that just don't perform. And then you have a team of maybe non-deemed stars that know how to work together, know each other's roles, know the shared mission, and are clear about their value within the overall team, and they're led in a way that allows them to be a high performance team. So I'm a big belief of mine. I think the best way to scale that in an organization, Ren, the counter to sort of the talent lead, is actually to get all people or all team leaders, and actually all individuals, but team leaders, to actually help breed that within their teams.
And I like that you brought in the individuals, Liz, because if I use the same analogy of the soccer team, you wouldn't only ever train the one
Or the manager.
leader.
No, correct.
You train the whole team, all the individuals to their highest potential. Now, to your point, not everyone's a Lionel Messi, but unless everyone is playing to their highest potential, and I know you're a Collingwood supporter and you will agree with me on Collingwood, is
Richmond, not Collingwood.
Are you Richmond? Oh, I thought you were Collingwood. Anyway, it doesn't matter. But I was talking about Collingwood the other day, is, love them or hate them, Collingwood are, and not every single person in the team is a superstar, but they are all playing to their highest potential. There's varied potentials, but they're all playing to the highest potential, and then they come together at this incredibly cohesive team playing for each other. And it's hard to beat a team like that, right? That not everybody is a Lionel Messi, but they're all playing like they're top of the tree Lionel Messi, whatever that looks like for them, because they've all been developed to that level, and then that team cohesion plays out.
I've seen how desperate it is sometimes when everybody wants to be a Lionel Messi. That's not what we need to do. For me, I think you can do a lot with people, but you have to start with self-awareness. And Shaun, you mentioned ego before. That kind of ego has to not be at play all the time. You have to be in service of the group task. And if you don't have that, regardless of the other skills, it's very difficult to form a team.
So great that you raised up. I mean, obviously, you know, I'm a zealot for emotional intelligence, of which self-awareness is a foundational component, Kat. But I love that you've mentioned that in all of our research, and we've spoken to many executives globally, all of our research points to self-awareness being the most missing in action skill within the workplace today. And it's interesting because a lot of leaders talk about this kind of inward focus. People are inwardly focused, not outwardly focused. But even though they're inwardly focused, they're still not self-aware. So that in itself is such a paradox, I think, around, yes, I'm thinking about myself and what I need to do, but actually I'm actually not self-aware in those moments as well. So anyway, love that.
The problem's all out there,
please,
and the problem's all out there. I'm not taking any accountability. It's like, fully take accountability of your contribution and the role that you're playing.
And what you're capable of, because as we know, self-awareness is around knowing what your strengths and derailers are. You have to own your strengths. You've got to give yourself permission to be confident, to actually lean in with all of your gifts, not just obsess about the things you're not good at, right? That is in itself is the trick, I think. But a lot of people don't go down that track. Thank you. Yes, Shaun.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of high-performing teams, I think one tenet that I've seen true is that they always want to continue to grow their skills or be better than the status quo that was today or that they've worked to. So it's just that sense of that the whole team is getting everyone to pull their socks up. So that means that concept of match fit, if we use that gaming analogy, means that everyone's just at a different level at different times. And if we use the geese again, we're all supporting people at the right time. So I think you can nudge high performance. It might not always be there, but it's fragile and it might not always last that long. But for me personally, I like to get under the skin of what performance actually looks like for the team first, to set that collective value proposition to take to the business versus that concept of the business creating their own expectation and perception of what the performance of my team needs to be. And I think that's really, really important because they don't see all the hard work, all the metrics, all the coaching, all the team meetings, all the one-on-ones, all of the operating rhythms that get you to actually perform. They only see the outcomes. So we need to be really clear in ourselves what success looks like and be really proud of the value prop we're taking into the organization.
Yeah, I love that. And what you just said sparked this concept of world of me, world of we, and world of us. This concept of world of us, and again, back to the Gallup research, is the collective customer experience exists across the world of we's, multiple world of we's, right, within those components or sometimes called silos. How do you create, and back to Elisa's point around culture, how do you create this broader culture? There's obviously the subculture of my team and my people. If you can get it there, great. Move away from individualism to the team. But then how do you lift up and go, actually, we're a collective of teams and there's a one team mindset around that organization? In my experience, I've found that much harder to orchestrate because of that, kind of belonging. You want to belong to your unit. We're mammals. That's what we're wired to do. Do we belong to a broader organization? And what does that look like? If we could just pause and get your thoughts on this, is that world of us creating that one team for the organization. Where have you seen that work well, and how has that played into results and customer outcomes?
I think one of the things that drags us into the world of us and keeps us there is purpose, quite frankly, and really understanding why we're there. It's beyond ourselves. It's got to be something that's not so lofty that you can't get to it, but something that you want to get to. Yeah, I'm signing up for that. So you have to actively work with people on cohesion around the why are we here? What are we trying to do? What is our bigger order? And make it a bit stretchy. So for me, to get people out of that me and we bit a little bit, it is what is that? And being really consistent around the purpose and the narrative and how we're going to get there.
I love that, Kat. And if we could just pause there for a second, I recently did quite a bit of research around this culture, the top-down culture versus the bottom-up culture, or as it was described as the aspirational culture versus the lived culture. And what you've just described, which is purpose, can be a very nebulous term, right? It could be a laminated value statement on a wall that everybody goes, hey, nobody's living that. That might be on a wall, but actually the lived culture is not that. Versus this bottom-up lived culture, what everybody is espousing and living and feeling is this real connectedness to actually this is the way we do things around here, and it is very purposeful, and I want to be a part of that. There's also this notion of espoused versus lived, which I think is very important to bring to life as well. Sorry, Elisa, I apologize for cutting you off.
Similar point, but sort of, maybe gelling the two together. And I love that cut in terms of purpose. And to your earlier point, Ren, I actually think there's no silver bullet, but it actually, to develop that broader way, it is bottom up and top down. So it is starting with your own why and your own values and your own sense of belonging, and then within your team, and then within your unit and within the organization. But then the organization has a responsibility to be really clear about its why and its purpose, and how that, and its clarity around its goals, and how that also translates down to the individual's day to day. So there's sort of my constant thing that goes through my mind is like, how do we continue to do bottom up, top down, and sideways? And then what do you have to reinforce that? So, what do you recognize within the organization? What do you reward? How do you bring that to life through different cultural levers to really reinforce both bottom up and top down? It's really hard. But I feel like that is the gel around. It's not one or individual, it's all of it. And I think it does start with the individual and wanting to give their best, and then give the team's best, and give so it's sort of bottom up is the most powerful way, but then top down helps with consistency and direction and missions around the broader why.
And that sense of belonging, right? Because the minute it's bottom up, but you feel top down is incongruent with it, you go, okay, but this is not in cohesion, and so there's a mismatch. But to your point, if you can, in the magic of the difficulty of bottom up, top down, and vice versa, sideways, if you can make that come to life, it's so powerful. It's so powerful. It's so powerful. Yeah. Thanks, Liz. And Shaun?
What's fascinating to me is where I've seen this work well is often where there's a threat to the us. So where there has been, say, a big customer we might lose, these cross-functional teams work fantastically together to maintain a client, but that doesn't translate to the everyday performance. So the heroics in trying to save a deal is always really fascinating to me. And how do we create that as just the day-to-day lived experience? So I'm fascinated in that dynamic. We need to save something to protect us versus that's just something we do every day. So at what point do we just stop pointing fingers and work together? To Elisa's point, I don't think there's a silver bullet there, but that's something that I just sit in fascination and really ask questions as to why that's not part of what we do all the time.
I love that. And how many organizations have we all belonged to where they say we're great in a crisis, and then you kind of go back. But one of my hypotheses around that, Shaun, would be the purpose of every organization is to survive on some level, right? And if there's a survival threat, then everybody galvanizes together. If there's not a survival threat or a perceived survival threat, how do you kind of put something in that creates that same sense of urgency? And kind of back to purpose, but also, Ren, one of my favorite things to talk about is humans are motivated by progress, right? So how do you kind of build in you're in the trenches, but gosh, are we making any progress? Like, you have to almost create that kind of, it's not creating a crisis, it's creating movement, right? So everybody feels like they're moving there.
And awareness first. Sorry,
Yeah,
please,
I've been
Elisa.
thinking about the same sort of thing. I think the COVID examples come up all the time about the mission of organizations, and everyone's like, how do we get that same level of focus and burning platform or whatever analogy? And I think you touched on it at the end, Kat, there in terms of I feel like there's two speeds that an organization has. And if you think about if we were in that speed all the time, and to touch on your earlier point, Ren, around resilience and sustainability of teams, it just wouldn't be sustained. Like, constantly fighting or challenging or burning platform isn't sustainable. So how do you sort of, learn through that and implement as much as you can through your two speeds so you can sustain performance through really peak periods and then less so peak periods, but still purposeful. It's an ongoing sort of discussion that lots of people still have around, why was it, why did everyone galvanize around? It's because, yeah, there was a big threat. And if you were constantly in threat, I'm not sure performance would sustain. It probably would start to drop off, I would say, if it was constant threat.
I agree. I
Yes,
think
it's
you'd be in a reactive state all the time, right? You never get to that creativity.
But yet we were creative through the COVID times and innovative. And, I spend a lot of time in geographies outside of Australia now. And I have to say they are really good at making a lot from very little. And how can we inject a bit more of that kind of scarcity mentality? To your point, Elisa, not because it's like constantly being in crisis and, kind of we're great in a crisis. Shaun said the same thing. But how do we bring a bit more to Shaun's challenge? And he's fascinated by it, as am I. What are the things that we inject in as a result of what we learned in that crisis that really helped us perform much better? How do we make that as part of BAU? This is the challenge. This is the challenge. And it is often in this kind of new ways of working that we don't quite finish, which is why a lot of transformations fail, because we never really sustain those new ways of working. We tick a box and we call it change management, and then we feel like we're done, but we're not done because we haven't changed the ways of working. And Alyssa, I know you and I talked about this a lot when we were at Latitude together, which is how do we change ways of working? We even had a program that we called Ways of Working, because that's where we inject new thinking and innovation into BAU. And a lot of organizations are not quite there yet in terms of making that stick. All right, I'm really conscious that we've been talking for a while. We might open, I've got more questions in case no one has questions, but certainly anyone on the call have any questions? If you'd like to, please go ahead and ask them either in the chat or just shout them out. We'd love to answer your questions. Otherwise, I'll keep on going through my list. Anyone have any questions for the panel?
Yeah, I've got a question.
Hello, Kerry Fuller.
Hi,
Lovely
darling.
to
How
see
are
you. Hello.
So I'm really interested in, and it actually picks up on exactly what you were just talking about, Renata, is how do you see the difference in the rituals at work and the structural pieces? Previously, we had teams that were all structured around pieces of technology and function, and I feel like that is all going to change now. How do you see the structural interplay and how high-performing teams will move from being in functional silos to a different type of structure moving forward with AI changing the way everything operates?
Brilliant question, Kerry, as would be expected from you. Panel, anyone have some thoughts on this?
I'm going to say, I don't know. This is this is the time that, and I think in your question was part of how we will figure that out, which is teams are traditionally organized around different elements in different organizations. Some is around, yes, technology, some might be around a process, some might be around a business unit, whatever it may be. And I think as we experiment in sort of how AI is going to supplement, augment, elevate their processes, I think it's almost like a breakdown and a rebuild. And some teams might look the same, and others, it's actually looking, I think organizations that are really, really experienced in process and workflows and understand how that's going to work will probably adapt quicker because they'll be able to see that quickly, see where the human and technology works together, and then reform those teams. So my gut is there's going to be sort of more disbanding, forming, but I actually don't really know yet. So I'm happy to say
I
that.
love that.
And it's about maybe just
One.
having, transparency in the process of how you're going to think about the work. And I actually think, to our early point, I want teams to tell us, especially in my role, about what they're experiencing, what they're learning, and their ideas. I don't have all the answers. So, sorry I didn't answer your question, but they're my thoughts, Kerry.
No, that is an answer, though. No, Elisa, that is an answer, and it's a really authentic, vulnerable answer that most leaders are thinking but won't necessarily say. So good on you for saying it. Kat or Shaun?
I was probably going to say the same. We have purposely at Custom Fleet been trying to change the language from teams and structures to an ecosystem. So what is the ecosystem we need to operate to best serve our customers to deliver our purpose? So I think, to Elisa's point, we're going to see a band and break for different purposes. So, we grapple often with, do we structure our organization in terms of the segment that we serve in the industry or the particular skill around a team? And we've gone from either side, but now we're thinking more around what are the structures and actually systems and processes that are more important to align ourselves around, and then thinking of not only our organization as an ecosystem, but all of the partners we have out there being part of that ecosystem too, and where do we push and pull and bring in different capability at the right time. So not an answer, but just something we're kind of live working through at the moment.
No, it is an answer. Good
exciting.
One,
it's exciting and it's different, but a couple of things. I think, our organizational structures largely are still built on command and control mechanistic assumptions. And what we're talking about is something that kind of completely disrupts that. So I agree with all that thinking. We don't know. Here's a view. I think the biggest resistance is going to come from our leaders themselves, not from our people, because they're going to want to hold on to their authority structures. And how do we kind of move through that as organizations? How do you give power to the people?
And here's my view before I go to Pankuri's question. So there's a reason why all the global research is saying that 70 to 80% of the skills required in the age of AI are human skills. And that is because the technical skills required are changing, and they're sometimes changing daily. What's not changing is the adaptability skills, the curiosity skills, the resilience skills, the collaboration skills. And if you look at team dynamics, and we all know forming, storming, norming, performing a journey, right? That there is a global framework around how teams operate. Whether we have to form in Team X or Team Y or Tribe A or Tribe B or Tribe C or whatever, we're a group of humans that are coming together to solve a problem, and the skills that we need to solve those problems are not going to change. They are collaboration skills, empathy, curiosity, great communication, knowing my strengths, making sure my derailers don't get in the way, so that regardless of how you form me in a flow versus case or ecosystem versus collective, whatever, I know how to come together with other humans and solve problems. I know how to work with change. I know how to work in different ways of working. It's okay. It's not a problem. I know how to work at the top of my skill set. It's why these human skills are so critical, because that's all we got as humans. It's all we got as we reform it into new teams, into new paradigms. Kerry, to your question, doesn't matter whether we're functionally or end-to-end focused, we can come together and work well together and get to the outcomes very quickly. So I think that's why the research is overwhelming now around the power of these human skills, and they're the only skills that really will take us through these next decades of change. Pankuri, over to you, probably for the last question, given where we are with time, but please go ahead. Well, let's see how we go.
Thank you, panel. It was really, really nice today. And I've logged in from India, so it was a beautiful session. Beautiful. So, well, great views, everything. I just wanted your view on, the topic, but how is it varied in industries, right? So I come from a background in social research. I've done quite a lot, decades of it in Australia, and now I've moved to India to give a bit of training and stuff. But I'm trying to understand and bridge that gap within the industries when it comes to, like Kat mentioned, finding the ikigai, the purpose, right? How do you tell them if it's the team of the champions or the champions team? Have you noticed any difference within industries? Or as far as adaptation comes, have you noticed something about, Renata, you mentioned about generation thing in India as well. Your thoughts on that, please.
And can I just extend it, Pankuri, just take some liberty here, please, if you don't mind, and correct me if I'm wrong. Cross-culture as well. So one of the things that I'm hearing from a lot of clients is those clients that have done a significant amount of offshoring or are doing offshoring is how do we bring cross-border teams together and work cohesively as a team? This is a big challenge for a lot of organizations at the moment. So I hope you don't mind me extending that, because I think you all work for organizations, and Kat, maybe not right now, but you have in the past, that are cross-border. How do you see this play out?
Yes, thank you. That'll be good.
I'm happy to start if you
Go
want,
for it.
because there's a few questions in there. I think I might just go to the industry question, because I have luckily worked across a number of different industries over the last many, many years. And I think your question was, if I can maybe just repeat it from that angle, is do we see a difference in different industries around how teams are formed and high performance and how, yeah. And I would say, well, my experience is no, it's actually more about size of organization. So, if you're looking to make cultural change or team change, it takes obviously longer in large organizations. I think in small or medium organizations, you can get your arms around them quicker. But it's going to be the cliche answer on industry-wise. It really depends on the leadership and the vision and the culture. That's actually what dictates rather than the industry, because I think most industries have a really innovation edge in their field. That's just my experience. We could generalize about different industries that maybe might be a bit slower or less high performance, but I think unless you've experienced it, it's probably hard. And I think in terms of global teams, I mean, what rich outcomes by having multiple experience, multiple backgrounds, multiple you know, skills into teams. I mean, if we really go back to the heart of belonging and diversity and getting the best outcome innovation, it's from multi-diverse teams. So what is hard and what most people say, and I'm not going to say is like time zone and issues, that's what generally you hear with global teams. But I actually think that's all solvable based on the team rituals and the team mechanics that you set up. So that's just a couple of comments. I know there's a few questions in there, but happy to pass on to Kat or Shaun if they've got any other views.
Yeah, I agree with you, Elisa. And I will say, many years ago, I did my postgraduate studies on collaboration and temporary work teams. So how do teams come together? What are the elements that need to be there for them to quickly get up to speed and collaborate? And overwhelmingly, it was the social bits and the leadership bits that contributed to how quickly organizations could do that and teams could do that versus anything else.
Yeah, back to that culture, belonging, identity, etc. Yeah,
Yep.
love it. Shaun?
Yeah, I think having done a lot of offshoring type work, particularly in places like India or the Philippines, I think probably at the time I was doing that type of work, we didn't have the term psychological safety, but actually what you need to do in working across cultures is actually to spend a lot of time truly listening, because some of those cultures will not be very open if things are not right, or they won't always tell you the truth. So that's where I call them the spidey senses need to come in, right? Like, something's not right. How do you get under the skin of that, build that trust and that really synergistic type of relationship? And then you start to hear the real story play out. So I think no matter what the structure of your organization is, how big or small it is, that is definitely the role of leaders right now. But that is really critical, especially in the Australian environment where there are now pretty tough rules and legislation around psychological safety itself. And I think a lot of organizations are grappling with how they tackle that, and then what the repercussions on leaders will actually be if they're found to not be leading psychologically safe teams.
Right at the time of some of the most disruptive change around the globe, we've introduced these, kind of new ways of working and expectation of teams and leaders. And it's a really, really interesting time. I know a lot of clients that we talk to are really grappling with what to do. And one of the things that we have found in our work across border is common language. So inclusion is often driven by common understanding of one another, of actually taking the time to understand who we are as people, how we tick, and that it's okay to be your full self, unless you've sort of got that, which I guess is loosely psychological safety, that common language and that acceptance across border. It's very, very difficult to have that team cohesion in our experience. So that's why it's so important. And Pankari, I'm assuming that in your work and in your study, in your research, you would confirm that that is in fact the case. Just keen to return back to you and get your thoughts.
That is true. And thank you for the answers there. Yes, that is something that I have observed as well, especially right now that you mentioned, Renata, with the uncertainty around globally, right? So we've spoken to a few organizations in the GCC as well that I was training for. And the kind of leadership that we see there because of the external factors versus the kind of leadership that we see within India when we're, it's completely different. And
Very different.
Yeah, that's true.
Interesting. Very interesting. Okay. All right. Well, I think rather than keeping all of you guys over the allotted time, I just want to stop and pause here to do some reflection and ask one last question of our panel, if possible. If you could give one piece, the quintessential question at the end of every panel and podcast, if you could give some advice or, for the people watching, what would be your advice around how to build some of this high-performing team norm into your organisation? What would you do? What are your reflections? Let's start where we start. One offer of advice.
Okay, I'll stick. It's forming as I speak, but I think we know that the world is a bit of a crazy place at the moment, and we're seeing different people and stressors break in different ways. I think it's just a time for us to, especially in the leadership space, spend that time with people, hold those one-on-ones as true time to connect, and just listen, because you can only react from there and make sure that you're getting all of the story rather than just potentially scooting over the emotion that people are feeling. So I think in the messiness of the world right now, it's time to just pause and listen to people and meet them where they're at.
Yeah, I've got something similar, Shaun. It's about care too, just listen and care and work through together. We've seen today that the conversation is we don't know the answers. We're working through it too, and we're processing things as individuals. So pause and care.
I like that. It's sort of less haste, more speed, right? So take the time, don't be in a hurry. Let the messiness evolve, as Elisa mentioned. Sorry, Elisa, over to you for your final thought.
So I was like, what I had in my head is be a good human, like be a great human and go with good intent always. And then adding on to sort of what both Shaun and Kat said is like, we know the ultimate high performance is high care and high support and high accountability and clarity. And if you can get to that top right-hand quadrant, that's, the best. People are really clear, have clear accountabilities, but they get high support and high care at the same time.
Thanks, guys. Okay, well, thank you so much for your wisdom, experience, vulnerability, authenticity, all of it came through today. And, I think that the loud and clear message for me is it is about the individual, right? Ultimately, every organisation is the collection of the individuals that work within it. And the role that we play as individuals for one another, and then leaders for the people that we get the privilege to lead. And very much around this sort of high performance doesn't just happen. It does require time, it requires energy, it requires listening, it requires authenticity, it requires vulnerability. Elisa made one point, just because we're the leader, we don't have all the answers. Please don't ask us to have all the answers, and don't keep looking at me for everything. I don't know. I'm also part of this dance, right? So what can you do to open yourself up to every individual and their development, and really work towards this high-performing we and then us? And, shameless plug in terms of Maxme, of course, our obsession is people, individual contributors, helping organisations to build towards that high performance through each individual within that organisation. Typically, it doesn't happen, unfortunately, enough. And I think we've reached a time in history where we need more of it. So please reach out if we can help in any way. Hopefully you found the conversation really helpful, and I'm sure we will see you next time for our next conversation. And thank you everyone for joining today. Sincerely, really appreciate it and very enjoyable. Thanks.
Thank you.
See you later.
Thank you.
Bye. Bye.